Hey, Daylight Church. And it's really good to be up here. I'm usually in front of some kids every Sunday, and I love teaching kids, but this is a really nice change. And I just want to share with you guys just something that the Lord has been teaching me for a long, long time, and it's about process. And, we live in a culture that is so results driven, right? And so, we want all these things, right? We have dreams and we have visions and we have goals, and we're trying so hard to get there so fast, right? And I'm very results driven person. I don't like the process at all. And if I would take a magic pill and open my eyes, and then everything would be happening for me. Like, that's the decision that I want to make, but that's not how it is. And you know that, I'm sure. And everybody's going somewhere in their life. And you just have to be patient. It takes a lot of work and a lot of time. And, it's just, maybe you want to be this way, but you're not. And you know that someday you're just working so hard, or you want to achieve this. Or maybe you're here and you're not even sure about this whole God thing. And you're just like, what is up with this? And, we recently did a sermon series about the spiritual disciplines of Christianity, reading your Bible, spending alone time with the Lord, fasting, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I am not that person. How am I supposed to get to that point? Well, you're right. It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard, and it does take a process. But in order to walk down that road, we have to have the right mindset. So I found this article about over a year ago, and it's called "Why Some Kids Try Hard and Why Other Kids Give Up." And the article starts out with this mother who's watching her toddler trying to strap herself in her high chair, and she's just like, just struggling. And usually a parent will like, oh, here, let me click that, and then it's over. But this mom, for some reason, she stood back and she watched her child work and just try so hard, and then finally, and then her mom said, yay, that's awesome. You worked so hard. That was amazing. And that was really different to me. And I was really amazed by that concept that mom just did that for the kid. And the article goes on to talk about these two different mindsets. There's a fixed mindset and there's a growth mindset. And so there are children who have fixed mindsets, and that means I have a certain amount of intelligence and I can't cultivate that. It's fixed. And I can only do certain things. I was made to do certain things, but other things I'm just not even going to try. I'm not going to challenge myself. But children with growth mindsets, they are willing to go through the struggle. They're willing to take on the challenges, and they like the process and just growing like that. And there was an experiment that the article talked about. And in one classroom, the teachers were going to give like an IQ test to the kids. And before the test, the teachers said, okay, you guys are smart, you're intelligent, you're geniuses, and you're going to ace this test. The other classroom, they were given process praise. You guys are hard workers. You can pull through any challenge that's set before you, and you can pull through this. You're going to do a great job. It turns out that the kids with fixed mindset who were told that they're smart and they're geniuses, they did all the easy questions and they skipped over the challenging questions. They didn't want anything to do with it. But the kids who were told process praise, they were more willing to take on the hard challenges of the questions. So it's so important to have a growth mindset and not a fixed mindset. And this guy, hold on, I skipped. Okay, and ever since I was a child, like even now, I have this very fixed mindset. And I remember when I was like 4 years old, my dad showed me a maze. And it was like the first time I had seen a maze. It wasn't this complex, but there was a bunny at the front, And then at the end of the maze, there was a big carrot. And he just showed it to me. He said, okay, Elizabeth, why don't you help the bunny get to the carrot? And he didn't explain anything to me about the maze. So I took my pencil and I drew a straight line from the bunny to the carrot. Okay, I understand the concept of 2 points and, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. I got that. But I did not understand the maze at all. And he's like, no. He erased my line. He said, now look, there's a maze here. Now, think about that. You can't draw a straight line. You can't just skip over all the lines. And so I took my pencil again and I drew around the maze up to the carrot. I just was not getting this maze concept. And then he said, no. And then he showed me how to go through the maze. And I remember feeling so frustrated. I was like, what the heck? What is up with this? I don't understand. Why can't I just go around the maze? Why can't the bunny hop over the maze? Why should I waste so much of my thinking, energy, to figure out how to get a bunny to a carrot? It's just stupid. I don't like it, and I don't want to spend my time doing that. So, fixed mindset, right? And this guy, Albert Einstein, a quote that I really like by him says, "It's not that I'm so smart, it's that I stay with the problems longer." And that's really amazing because everybody thinks, oh, Albert Einstein, anybody who's smart, they can fix problems like that. But the truth is, geniuses will spend hours and hours and days and days and days and even months or years of their life focusing on something and getting it done. That's something that I really want, and that's something that God's really working on me. This guy, Eric Liddell, he was an Olympic gold medalist a long time ago. I don't know when. But he was also a missionary to China, but he was a very fast runner. And he said, when I run, I feel God's pleasure. And the first time I heard that, I was like, wow, when I run, I feel a lot of things, but I don't feel God's pleasure, right? And there's some people who absolutely love running, and I'm like, well, I'm just not one of those people, so I'm just not going to take up running ever. And I'm okay with that. But I remember having a conversation with Abby a while ago, and she was talking about running, and she said, these are the things that I do, and Liz, you should try it. It's really good. I'm just like, I don't know. And so I was just thinking so much about it, and one night I decided to look up on Google, I hate running, what should I do? Basically, and it took me to this really awesome website. And it was so encouraging to read because it says, the reason you hate running is because your body is not physiologically ready to run. I'm like, okay, yeah, I knew that. And it said, so if your body hates running, then just walk and start walking. And then when you're ready to run, run. And you run until your body says, I hate this. Okay, fine. And then you stop running and you walk again. And then and then when you're ready to run, you run again. I'm just like, okay, I can do that. So I started doing that. I was walking and running and walking and running. And then one day I was at Cherokee Park and I just decided to run the whole loop without stopping, and I did. And I was like, yes, I did it. And now I'm at a point where I'm like running consistently and I can run without stopping. So it's really awesome. So that's process, right? It's just being patient and merciful with yourself. I worked at the university, and last year I was teaching a beginning level ESL class. So these are people who are learning English, and I was teaching them how to write. So I teach them how to construct sentences, and then you put the sentences together and you make paragraphs, basically, and you just work on that the whole semester. There's this one student who was having a really difficult time. Just her grammar was all over the place, and she had awful spelling, and just when I read her paragraphs, I don't know what she was saying. I mean, they're English words, but who knows what she's trying to say. And it was like that the whole semester. And one day I gave her test grade back, and it wasn't good. Like, she was kind of failing the class. And then she came up and talked to me after class was over, and she said, "Why did I get this grade? I feel so bad. I'm doing so terribly in your class, and I just want to get better. I just don't know what I'm supposed to do." And she asked me, "Did you mark all of my mistakes?" And a really good strategy is to mark only a few of the mistakes so they can focus on certain mistakes. And I said, "No, I didn't mark all of your mistakes." She said, "Why?" And I said, "If I marked all of your mistakes, you would feel very stressed out, extremely stressed out." And she said, "I want to feel stressed out." And she said it with tears in her eyes. She said, "I want to feel stressed out. I want to know what I'm doing wrong, and I want you to tell me everything that I'm doing wrong." And I said, no, I'm not going to do that, because you need to focus on one little thing at a time. And once you master that little thing, then you can move on to the next thing, and then the next thing, and the next thing. And this is going to take a long time, okay? You're not going to learn English in one semester. It's going to take years, okay? It's going to take several years to learn English, and you're just going to have to work and be consistent. And that's how a lot of it is for us. There's something that we are trying to achieve, and sometimes we feel like we're just walking through the desert, right? God has all these promises, and He will. You will see them come to pass if you keep believing and walking with Him. But there are so many people in the Bible, like King David, for example. He was anointed as king of Israel as a teenager, but he didn't actually become king until he was 30 years old. And the times in between, he was running from his enemies. He was in the wilderness, hiding out in caves, and the Lord was with him. The Lord made him successful in battle, but he was still in this desert place. The same thing with Jesus. Jesus, we don't know anything about his early childhood life, only a few things. But his ministry started when he was 30 years old, right? So he spent some time hidden from everybody. And all that time, God was working on him. It was a process that he went through. There was a time when I was in college, and I was going through this really dry season of my life. And I was going to church and listening to sermons and reading my Bible and listening to, worship music, but nothing felt like I didn't get any joy from that. And I felt like I wasn't growing. I wasn't learning anything. And I was just feeling really bummed out. And then I ended up going to a Christian conference, and there was a room for prayer. So I went to the prayer room, and I prayed with this girl. I didn't really tell her what I was going through. I just wanted prayer. And so she prayed for me. And after the prayer, she said, "I don't know how much you know about gardening, but sometimes the gardener waters not directly on top of the plant, but away from the plant. And they do that so the roots of the plant will extend out and grow deeper." And she said, "Maybe your life feels dry right now, but God is extending you and growing you in a very deep and meaningful way." And so that's, if we feel like we're in a desert and you are totally committed to God, I promise you that God is working in your life, and it's a process. So some things to keep in mind is when you're going through a desert or a process, you have to be okay with not being okay. So I can't tell you how many years of my life I've spent trying to learn guitar. But it's just been this ugly cycle every time. I teach myself the chords, and then the problem is I'm such a perfectionist that I cannot stand myself playing guitar. I am so grossly incompetent. And the problem is I'm not okay with that. And so I hate it. So I just stop. And I just put my guitar in the corner of my room, and I just stop forever. How is that process? I just want to pick up the guitar and be awesome instantly. It doesn't work like that. You have to be okay with that. I was a tennis player in high school, and I played all 4 years. At my senior year, I was the number 1 tennis player. But before you are really impressed by that, the only reason I was the number 1 is because the other number 1 girl started having back problems. So I was number 1, and I promise, I was not number 1 material. I was barely number 2 material, okay? You can talk, if you ask my brother who was on the team with me at the same time, he will tell you that, okay? I'm not saying that just so I can be modest, I promise you. And so I hated being number 1 so much, and I was so over it. And I was even talking to my other friends kind of playfully about how I should pretend like I broke my leg and just walk to school one day with a cast on my leg so I couldn't play anymore. I was thinking about that. That's how much I hated it. But I remember one day I played this other girl from another school who was also number 1. And she was number 1, okay? I was fake number 1. And I was just playing this match, and I was laughing, to myself. I'm like, she is so awesome, and I am not awesome. And just the whole time, and I didn't score any match points, okay? In tennis, you score points, but you have to get 4 points to win a match point. I didn't score any match points. It was like, when I went to my coach at the end of the game, I said, 8-0, didn't get any points, peace out. And I was okay with that, because I just embraced who I was, and I kind of just had mercy on myself. I'm like, it's my last year, I'm not going to make a big deal out of it, And so you have to do that. You have to realize where you are. You have to realize your weaknesses and the things that you're facing. Jesus tells a story in Luke 18 about these 2 guys. One is the Pharisee, and one is the tax collector. The Pharisee is the guy who thinks he's all that, and he follows all the rules in the Bible. He's like, I'm all good, there's nothing wrong here. And so he says this, said, I thank you that I'm not a sinner like everyone else, where I don't cheat, I don't sin, I don't commit adultery. I am certainly not like that tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I give you 1/10 of my income. Ho ho. Nice. And this guy here, the tax collector, he's bowing down. He said, oh God, have mercy on me. Be merciful to me, for I am a sinner. He knows where he is. He knows where he stands before God, and he is completely honest and vulnerable with God and where he is. He said, please, I can't do this. I can't be what you want me to be. I'm struggling right now, and I need you to forgive me and to help me. And Jesus said, the 2 men who left that day, the Pharisee was not justified before God. The tax collector was. Okay, this is one of my favorite Disney movies. I grew up watching this constantly with my little brother, and now that I'm older, every time at this scene of the movie, which is the end of the movie, without fail, I cry. I just tear up, and I start crying because it's so touching. If you're not familiar with the story Mulan, she was a girl from China, and the whole cultural system was based on honor, bringing honor to your family. What can you do? Are you impressive? Are you pretty? Are you good enough to be a wife, right? Are you good enough to bring honor to your mom and dad? And Mulan was just not. She was a big disappointment to her family. She messed up a lot, and she felt awful about it. And then her father was summoned to war, and her father was really old and feeble, and he couldn't go. So Mulan cuts her hair, and she pretends to be a man, and she goes and fights in the war in China. And actually, she basically saves all of China. And she comes back home to her dad, and he's so worried about her because she just left unexpectedly. But she comes back, and she says to her dad, Father, look, I did this, right? I saved China. I brought you the sword of the enemy, and I brought you the crest of the emperor. It's to honor our family. And then she gives those things to her dad, and he drops them, and he hugs her. And he says, the greatest gift and honor is having you for a daughter. You belong to me. You don't have to save China, right? I don't care about that. You just belong to me, and that's good enough for me. That's how God sees us, right? He's not expecting you to do all of these awesome things. That's not how you get love from God. But God is merciful, and he sees you for where you are. On the other hand, you can't just ignore the sin in your life, right? If you have something that you're struggling with, you can't say to yourself, well, that's just in my life, but the Lord overlooks that, so I'm just going to keep on living the way I am. No, right? You should get before the Lord, be vulnerable with him, and say, Lord, I have this nail in my head, or I have this in my life, and it's causing all this pressure and all this problems, and all your sweaters are snagged. Well, go to the problem. Get with the Lord. Talk with him honestly. And there's a Bible verse that says, if we live in the light, that means if we walk in honesty, right? If we live in the light as God is in the light, then he is faithful and just to forgive us of our sin. Not only that, to cleanse us from all unrighteousness, right? So he's not only willing to forgive the nail in our head, like the girl who was being so ridiculous about it, but he's willing to remove that and to completely clean you of that wickedness. Another thing, if you're in a process, that you have to do is just wait, right? And everybody looks at waiting as a very passive activity, right? You're not doing anything. You're just waiting there. But that's not true. It's not passive at all. You are actively waiting, right? You are believing, and you are hoping, and you're praying, and you're just trusting in God. This is what Elizabeth Elliot says about waiting. She said, one discipline of the spiritual life to which many of us find most difficult to submit is that of waiting. No other discipline reveals more about the quality of our faith than that one. Sometimes we are subject to criticism from others because we seem to be doing nothing. When waiting is an act of obedience, it is, of course, an invisible one. Only the one waited on sees it for what it is, but we must resist the temptation to defend and explain to our critics and simply go on waiting. It's not easy, right? There was another research study with kids and a marshmallow. They take a kid, they put him in a room, they put a marshmallow in front of them, and they say, okay, you have two options. You can eat the marshmallow right now, or you can wait 15 minutes, and then you'll get 2 marshmallows. Okay? But if you don't wait, you don't get 2 marshmallows. Okay, what do you think most of the kids did? Right, most of them ate the marshmallow instantly, right? And they're like, I'm not waiting. Okay, 15 minutes to a kid is an eternity. Okay, I know that. I teach kids every week. Okay, even for some of us, 15 minutes in a room by ourselves is an eternity. But yeah, the kids, only 30% of the children were willing to wait for the second marshmallow. That's very similar with God, right? We can make our own decisions. We can go our own way and make things happen when we want them to happen. But I don't believe God's blessing is on it at all. So this guy, Abraham in the Bible, God says, and he and his wife Sarah, they're really, 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 really old. And they still haven't had any children. And God says, I'm going to give you a son. But they're still waiting. It's been all this time, and they're still waiting to have a son. And then Sarah says to Abraham, hey, why don't you take my servant Hagar, and why don't you have relations with her, and then you can have a son through her. So they didn't wait on the Lord, and that's what they did. They had a son, Ishmael, but because of their decision, they caused a lot of complication and a lot of just really difficult things for the rest of that generation. That's what they caused because they didn't wait on the Lord. I think of the movie Home Alone, and in the beginning of the movie, everyone's rushing to get to the airport. And because they're rushing, guess what? They left Kevin at home, right? Because you're just in a hurry. And if you just have to take it slow, right? And their whole vacation was ruined because they were in such a hurry. They wanted to get things done. And that's what happens when you don't wait. There's a book called The Pilgrim's Progress written by John Bunyan. It's really great classic literature. And the main character is a guy named Christian, and he's walking to the celestial city. So he's on his way basically to heaven. There's a lot of symbolism in here. And on the road, there's a house called the Interpreter's House. And in every room, there's like a scene of people, and they're doing something, and it represents something in Christianity. And they go to one room, and the interpreter says this. The interpreter took Christian into another room where two children sat in chairs. The older child, Passion, was restless. The younger child, Patience, sat quietly. Christian asked, "What is the reason for Patience's discontent?" The interpreter said that they had been told to wait 1 year for their reward. But Passion wanted it all now, while Patience was willing to wait. Then someone brought Passion a bag of treasure, which caused him to rejoice and scorn Patience. But he squandered the treasure, and it became rags. "Explain this to me," said Christian. And the interpreter said, "Passion is a figure for the men of this world who want everything now. Patience is a figure for the men who await that world which is yet to come. For men like Passion, they believe in the proverb, 'A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush.' I see that Patience has the better wisdom because he waits for the best things. And in the world to come, he will have much when Passion will only have rags." Right, so waiting for the Lord and just agreeing to wait and be obedient and trust in God is obviously not an easy thing to do, and it's not passive at all. So the Bible has a lot to say about patience. It says, "Be still in the presence of the Lord and wait for him to act." Another verse says, "The Lord will fight for you. You just keep still." Right? Isn't that interesting? That's one of my favorite Bible verses. So you can just trust that God has everything under control, right? He knows what he's doing, and he's smarter than you. He sees more than what you see. So you just stay still in the presence of the Lord. Wait patiently for the Lord. Be brave and courageous. Yes, wait patiently for the Lord. And yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. Right? When you wait on the Lord, maybe you feel tired of waiting, but the Bible promises you that the Lord will give you strength. Right, and give you faith. It really, when you wait, it really tests how much you believe in God, right? How long are you willing to wait until God does something, right? Another thing is let Jesus do his thing. So several years ago, a really good friend of mine, she explained to me that life with Jesus is like riding in the car. Jesus is driving, and you're in the passenger seat. And when you're driving and you're going somewhere that you're not really sure where you're going and you don't know the directions, are you going to tell Jesus where to go? Right? Are you going to ask him, "Are we turning here? Or how many more miles is it? Did we miss something?" Right? Jesus knows. If you trust in Jesus, he knows where he's going. And you're not. Right? If you're in a car with a friend on a way somewhere, are you going to be so involved in the direction of where the car's going? No, you're just going to be with your friend. you're going to be listening to music, you're going to be chatting it up, right? So it's all about being with Jesus through this whole process, right? There's this really great children's book called Song of the King, and it's about these 3 knights, and they have to go through a dark forest and get to the other side to marry the princess. Whoever gets to the other side gets the princess as their wife. And they get to choose companions. And there are 2 guys who chose, a strong guy or a fast guy, and they chose their own companions. But the 3rd guy chose the prince, right? The prince who knew the forest. And while they were walking through the forest, the king on the other side would play his trumpet, right? He would play the same song, the same tune 3 times a day. The problem is when the knights were walking through the forest, there were all of these other people called Hope Knots. It's a kid's book, so it's kind of cheesy. They're called Hope Knots. And when the king would play his instrument, they would get out their own, and they would start playing different tunes. And so it would really confuse the knights a lot. So the first 2 guys didn't make it through because they weren't familiar with the song of the king that the king was playing. But the 3rd guy who chose the prince as his companion, the prince knew his father's tune. And so the prince was able to guide the knight through the forest successfully. And that's Jesus, right? If you choose Jesus as your companion, he knows the truth, right? He knows what his Father says. And Jesus will guide you through those things so you can get to the other side. And just being with Jesus, being in his presence, it gives you strength, right? So there's a Bible verse that says, "Blessed are those who trust in the Lord and have made the Lord their hope and confidence. They are like trees planted along the riverbank with roots that reach deep into the water. Such trees are not bothered by the heat or worried by long months of drought. Their leaves stay green and they never stop producing fruit." Right? If you stay with Jesus, you're going to have that source the whole time. Everything else just kind of fails you, right? Wherever you get your strength, wherever you turn to get your joy or your peace or your love, that's all that it fails. It fails you sometimes. And if you stay connected with Jesus, like the tree next to the riverbank, you're going to get that strength. You're always going to be producing fruit. Your leaves will be green, right? Maybe it doesn't feel like it, but you will if you have that connection to Jesus. And just making him your joy, right? If you are in love with a person, you wake up in the morning and you think about that person instantly, right? What if you made Jesus your lover? What if you made Jesus the delight of your heart, right? The Bible says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. There's another verse that says, "In your presence there is fullness of joy, and you have shown me the path of light." In your presence. So just being in God's presence gives you that joy and the strength that you need to get through that. And Jesus says this, "Remain in me and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine. And you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me." Right? You have that choice. You can go your own way. You can get in your own car and you can drive. You can get your own map with your own directions. You can do that. That's fine. But Jesus says, if you remain in me, then you will be fruitful, right? You will be successful, and I'll give you the joy of doing that. Moses in the Old Testament, before he went out into the wilderness to the promised land, he was talking to God on the mountain, and he said, "Lord, before we go to the promised land, we need you to be with us. We can't go unless you're with us, right? We need your presence because just being with a person that you love, just them being there, that just gives you strength and comfort, right? If you're going through a hard time, just having that person there, that's what God is to us. And this is kind of a paraphrase, but Moses says, Lord, I'd rather be in the wilderness with you than in the promised land without you. There's just no way. I'm just not going to live my life unless you're a part of it. And for me personally, I really can't imagine. I don't want to imagine my life if God's presence wasn't a part of it. And then when you do go through your life, you accomplish all these things, and you lots of good things happen for you, and you go through challenges and obstacles. Maybe you have this box of accomplishments at the end of the road, right? But you look back, and but really nothing compares to that relationship with Jesus. You know, a lot of people go through their life without a relationship with Jesus, and they have this, and they have that, and they have all of this. But if they're honest with themselves, they still kind of feel an emptiness, right? And God's presence fills that emptiness that we're all longing for. And we think we can fill up the emptiness with all these things that we're going for, and we're the person that we're trying to be, and the places that we're trying to go. And even Paul, in the New Testament, he was this really righteous guy, and he was working so hard to be a good person. And he said, I once thought these things were valuable, so achieving righteousness and all of that stuff. I once thought these things were valuable, but now I consider them worthless because of what Christ has done. Yes, everything else is worthless when compared with the infinite value of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. So nothing compares to that relationship with Jesus. It's so hard to get through this life without that presence in your life. So I just really encourage you to just get in the presence of God and to live in his presence, not just your own alone quiet time. You know, you open the Bible and you read and then you go about your day, but walk with him, right? When you go to Walmart with him, like he's with you. And then you can talk to him. You're like, Jesus, why are all these people here? You know, what are they doing? Or when you're driving there, are you going to say, Jesus, I think that guy's an idiot. He just cut me off. No, right? Because you're with Jesus and his presence is real. And I've prayed with several people. Like I've just asked, can I pray with you? And then at the end of the prayer, they're like, wow, I felt God. Like the presence is very real and very personal. And the Lord wants to be with you and work in your life through the process that you're going